Hi, welcome back to the Gambling Chef Kitchen. I am super excited about our recipes this week because we are sparing the animals and we are going to make two of my very favorite things on the entire planet, starting with today's vegetable lasagna. This is gluten-free, delicious layers of vegetables and lots of cheese. And if you follow the steps, I promise this will turn out beautifully every single time. Let's get started making our vegetable lasagna. So the first thing we're going to do is to prepare our vegetables. I have 3 medium-sized eggplants. These are not gorgeous eggplant. They're a little beat up on the outside, but I try to buy organic if I can. And honestly, the regular ones weren't any better. So we're going to start off by just chopping off this top part. I scrape this part so that I can preserve as much of the eggplant meat as possible. So that top you just chop off, and then the bottom just take off a teeny bit. You're really trying to not waste. So that's all we have to do for the eggplant. Again, for this top part, to save more of the flesh, I just kind of bend that back and chop off the very top of the eggplant, and then just the very bottom. And then we also have 3 squash. So zucchini is in the squash family. That's why I called it a squash. So this is a regular zucchini, and you're just taking that very top part off again and the very bottom. We're going to be using our Mandoline slicer to cut these. That's why we don't need to chop them up with our knife. This is a Mexican squash. Again, top and bottom. And I have 1 yellow squash here. You can mix this up. You could use all zucchini. You can use all yellow squash. You can use a combination like I did. It's totally up to you. This is not one of those recipes where it needs to be super precise. So the next thing we're gonna do is get our Mandoline slicer. I've cleared everything out of the way because we wanna make sure that we are very careful with this. This is the Mandoline slicer. It is very sharp. This one was very cheap. I bought it on Amazon several years ago and it's still sharp, so you do not need to invest a lot of money. And they have like a little knob on the bottom, and I've set mine to 4. You could do 4 or 5 for this recipe. You could even go thinner, actually. It is up to you. The most important thing to remember is keep your little digits away from the sharp blade. This was the #1 cause of accidents in culinary school. When I went to culinary school, and we had the French Mandoline slicers, and ours was dull as heck. So I actually would bring this guy with me, and I never cut myself because if you're careful and you have a really sharp slicer and you keep your hands away, then you're not going to cut yourself. So it's a little tricky when you have an eggplant that's like wider than the base, which is another reason that you want these small to medium-sized eggplants and not like a big one. But if you did get a big one, you could chop it in half and slice it that way. So I'm going to turn this so that it's facing a direction that I can work with. And we're just going to press it toward the blade, or into the blade, I guess. And I'm going to keep doing that and making my slices. And you're going to notice they're going to accumulate under the blade like this, but you just move them to the side after you're done with, I don't know, 3 or so. And I have a lot of experience with this. So this does come with a guide that you can clamp. It's like a little claw. You clamp it on top of your vegetable. And if you are not used to using these, you absolutely should use that because you'll have less chance of cutting yourself. And even though this is very sharp, you can see that I'm having to use just a little bit of force at times to get it to go through. And then sometimes you will have this happen where it like doesn't perfectly cut your slice. That's totally fine for this. It's not gonna hurt anything. So I'm gonna finish doing this to our eggplant, and I will be back in just a minute because then we are gonna salt these. Okay, so I finished my eggplant, and I'm gonna wash the Mandoline slicer before we do the zucchini. But the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually taking the eggplant And I am putting it in a container. Any kind of container is fine. And then we're gonna salt these. So I have some kosher salt and I'm just sprinkling a little bit on top of the eggplant. And then you're just gonna stack more eggplant on top of that because the salt will kind of penetrate. I don't know if I can go this way and fit more in. Almost. So stacking, salting. Do not be too generous with the salt. It's going to get overly salty and we're not washing these off. So just salt them, but don't go nuts. And the reason we're doing this is because we need to get as much liquid out of this eggplant as we possibly can, because we're making a lasagna with no noodles, right? So there's no starch in this to absorb anything. And if you just try to cook these vegetables, first of all, eggplant doesn't taste very good if you don't prepare it properly. But second of all, you are going to end up with a watery mess. This is still going to have some water in it, this lasagna, but it's going to be a lot less when you're properly taking care of your vegetables. So I'm going to finish doing this with my remaining pieces of eggplant, and then I will show you how to prepare the zucchini. I just wanted to make sure you got a really good shot of how much salt I am putting on the eggplant, and also the thickness of the eggplant itself. Apologies, I have salt all over my fingers right now, but this is the thickness you're going for. I wouldn't go thicker than this. You could go thinner than this. You'll just have to cook more pieces and do more layers. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, I washed the Mandoline slicer off. Again, eggplant, it tends to oxidize and it can be bitter when it's raw. So it's important to clean your Mandoline off, and a knife if you're switching between cutting eggplant and something else in a different recipe. Same thing goes for artichokes too, actually. They just tend to get oxidized and bitter and weird. So just clean it, give it a quick wash. And we're gonna do exactly the same thing, the exact same thickness now with our zucchini and our other squash. And you're gonna find with the zucchini that it is going to be put up a little bit less resistance than the eggplant did. So it's a little bit easier, but again, you got these beautiful slices. I should also mention that if you don't want to invest in a Mandoline slicer, that you can absolutely do this by hand. You're just never going to get these beautiful even slices. It's probably almost impossible. And this is faster. So I'm going to finish the zucchini again with the yellow squash. Is kind of a weird shape. So just turn it in the easiest direction and work your way through it. And again, watch those digits. We don't want any cuts or bandaged hands to come out of this. Use your guard that comes with this. Don't be like me unless you're very, very comfortable with what you're doing. So I've done a little bit of the squash to show you, and then here's the Mexican squash. And this one's the easiest because it's just pretty straight and flat. So we got more beautiful pieces. So I'm gonna finish cutting those and then I'll show you how I salt them. Okay, we're finished slicing. We're finished actually with knives for this recipe. We don't have to chop anything else. And I also wanted to remind you, after you wash your Mandoline slicer, then make sure that you set the blade back to 0. So that will retract the blade down into the device, and then you can't cut yourself. Very important. Always remember to do that. Okay, setting that aside, and now we're just gonna salt our different squash, and it's very similar to how we did the eggplant. Again, I just take a plastic container. You can use a dish, whatever you want. Lay down your strips and a layer of salt on top of those. I'll show you the yellow squash. Too long to fit sideways. And then you can notice too that I'll tend to alternate the direction of the squash because it'll fit better if you do that. It's like a little puzzle piece. Just a little tip for you. That's just kind of how my brain works. So sometimes I do stuff and I forget to explain it to you, but there we go. A layer of the squash, and I'll show you also a layer of the Mexican squash. They also call this gray squash in the grocery store. I have not heard that term before, so I don't know if that is common for this type of squash, but you know, okay. It just isn't gray, so it weirds me out. It's still green. I would call it like a striped squash or something. So a little more salt. And then we are going to make our tomato sauce because we want these to sit for a while. We want to draw as much moisture out of them as possible before we cook them. We're going to pre-cook these also. So I will see you in a minute because we're going to make our really easy and delicious tomato sauce. Okay, this is going to be the easiest tomato sauce that you have ever made. I can almost guarantee that. This is a can of San Marzano tomatoes. I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm covering the name. Make sure it says San Marzano and peeled tomatoes. We do not want crushed tomatoes. We do not want tomato sauce. The San Marzano tomatoes are the secret to a good tomato sauce. My burner is not on. I am just going to pour this can of tomatoes into my pot here. And I'm going to take a little water and swish it around the can so we don't waste anything. So that is going to go in. No wasting, very important. And now before I turn the heat on, I'm going to get my hand in here and I'm going to squish these. If you have kids, this would be a great thing to have them help you with. Tomato juice is going to fly everywhere and I try to make my stove all clean for you, but serves me right. And we're just breaking these up. These are a beautiful plum tomato, aroma tomato essentially, but these are a special varietal and they only grow in like very few, maybe even one place, like to be able to call them a San Marzano tomato in Italy. And they just make the best sauce. They really, really do. Okay, I think that is good. So we have some chunks of tomato that I'm totally fine with, and I'm gonna wash my hand and will be right back. Okay, I have washed my hands and I am now going to turn the heat on. And I'm going to do these a little bit above medium. I am going to heat these up and then we're going to add our salt and our olive oil. It's kind of a weird process. There's no garlic, there are no onions in this, but it is delicious. Italian food is all about the simplicity of the ingredients. It's supposed to be anyway. Americanized Italian food has gotten a little off the rails if you ask me. But if you go to Italy, it's all about the essence of the ingredient, the freshness of the ingredient. Japanese food is similar in that way. There aren't a lot of spices and other things you throw in. You're really showcasing the ingredients. So this tomato sauce showcases those beautiful, sweet San Marzano tomatoes and some fresh basil we're going to put in here. And I will see you back in just a second when our tomato sauce is hot and bubbling. Okay, our tomato sauce has started to bubble. So I'm going to add some salt. Probably... I just got salt all over my stove, which you can see now. You're welcome. Probably about a teaspoon of salt, I would say. Maybe not quite that much. Go under because you can always add salt, but you can't take it away. I will be right back. I'm going to clean my stove off a little bit. So if I wasn't filming and that had happened, I would honestly probably just leave it. But I am filming and I do try to make everything look nice for you guys. Oh, I love it. Anyway, I'm going to stir that salt in now with a spatula. And we are not going to cook this sauce for very long. We're not trying to make an all-day tomato sauce that sits forever. And frankly, when you have really good quality tomatoes like this, you don't need to do that anyway. We're just going to cook this for a couple more minutes. And in a second, I will add the olive oil to this. All right, our sauce has been cooking for probably about 5 minutes, and I am now going to put in about 2 or 3 tablespoons of olive oil, extra virgin, and we're gonna stir that into the sauce. I know that's kind of weird. It's like a reverse method when you think of making a tomato sauce. That is definitely not the order that you think of making it in, but trust me, this is delicious. So we're gonna just get that stirred into our tomatoes as much as possible. And then we are gonna continue to let this cook for probably not a long time, maybe another 5 minutes. And then the last thing we're gonna do is add our fresh basil. So you can see that olive oil gets incorporated pretty easily into the sauce. I'm gonna turn the heat down. We don't want it to bubble quite that vigorously. I'll see you guys back in just a few minutes. Okay, our sauce has been bubbling for about 5 more minutes and I'm gonna turn the heat off. And now I'm gonna take some beautiful fresh basil leaves And I am going to tear those and put them into our sauce. You can chop these if you want. I like the process and the feel of tearing the basil and putting it in. And also, if you chop it, it can turn it a little bit black, which, I mean, it's not really going to affect the flavor. But we aren't cooking, you'll notice the basil. We're using it to perfume the sauce. Now, I like a lot of basil. And remember, we don't have anything in this sauce except salt and olive oil. So this is really going to provide the backbone of this tomato sauce flavor, besides our tomatoes, of course. But it just starts smelling so good, and it perfumes the sauce with the most incredible smell and flavor. And again, that's why you're not cooking it. The sauce is still plenty hot enough to cook this out. And at this point, you can taste it for seasoning. You can decide if you want to add more salt, more olive oil. You can definitely do that, or more basil. Again, how much you add is totally up to you. And I am going to taste this, but I think it's probably pretty good. And I will see you in just a second because we are going to start to cook our vegetables. Okay, I have a couple teaspoons of olive oil heating up in a pan, and I am going to start cooking our vegetables. I'm going to do the squash first because the eggplant should sit around longer, and hopefully you can see this on camera, but there's a lot of water that you can see that's come out of this, which is great. You don't need to blot them off before you put them in the pan though. You can just dump them in here. And this is on a medium heat, but I've been letting it sit for a while. And your pan's just gonna continue to get hotter, so you don't wanna crank this up to like high heat. We're gonna try to cook as much water out of the vegetables as possible, but we don't wanna burn the pan. The pan starts getting really, really warm after you start doing this well. Another reason we're doing the squash first is there's gonna start to be a residue that builds up in the bottom of the pan, but it's a lot worse if you start with the eggplant because they just tend to have a little bit of a stickiness to them. So I'm gonna let these cook on the first side for a couple of minutes. You can see there's no color yet on these, and we do want some color, so I might crank my heat up just a little bit past medium, and I will show you what they look like when we're ready to turn them over. All right, I think these guys are ready to flip. Got a nice little bit of color on there. These can be a little tricky to flip with tongs, but you'll figure it out, I'm sure. So we got a nice brownness, and on the second side, they're really only gonna cook for probably another minute or so. Again, we're not trying to cook these to sogginess. We just are trying to draw that moisture out. So the only thing that should be left in the pan after this is what's making it bubble right now, which is the oil. So I will see you in just a second. I'm gonna take these out of the pan when they're ready, but I will come back to you before that. All right, it's been another minute or so, and I have a plate over here off to the side, and I'm going to remove my squash and put them on the plate. And again, if you leave these in the pan too long, they are gonna start to disintegrate, and that's another reason that we don't wanna cook the Jesus out of them. And then I'm gonna start another layer of squash. It looks like there's enough oil left in the pan where I don't need to add more at this point. And again, I'm twiddling with the heat a little bit. It was a little above medium. I'm putting it down now to be a little bit like, well, it's just a little lower. It's probably right on medium. So this is, by the way, the only labor-intensive part of this recipe, because you do need to cook these in batches and it takes a little bit of time. I did try to do this in the oven at one point, and there's just no way to get the even cooking if you do it that way. It's so much better to do it in a pan. I've tried different types of pan. I tried a grill pan that tends to leave burn tastes on your vegetables, and you don't want that. You don't want a burnt oil taste. So I found that the stainless steel pan is the perfect solution. So just bear with the cooking process. And I am going to show you what these zucchini look like when I flip them over, and then we'll move on to the eggplant. Okay, it's seriously only been like another minute or two, but they are ready to flip over. Again, you want that nice color on there, but we don't want these to get soggy. So we are cooking out that extra moisture. There we go. Okay, I'm gonna cook these for another minute or two on this side and I will show you what they look like. All right, zucchini is done. You can see again, the other side has some color on it and I am moving it over to my plate that I have here on the side. And I'm going to start another batch. So I'm gonna continue cooking my zucchini and my squash. And again, I will see you back in a few minutes and we are gonna start the eggplant because it's just slightly different. Okay, I finished my squash and now we're gonna do the eggplant. So I'm gonna add a couple of teaspoons more oil in the pan. The eggplant is gonna take more oil than the squash, so it's really important that you don't use a lot of oil for the squash because there's no way to get around using oil for the eggplant. So you can see again, if I can catch the light correctly, that there's a nice amount of water that has come out of the eggplant. The eggplant we're also probably gonna cook a teeny bit longer than the squash because they just need it. Squash doesn't need quite as much cooking time. So I am going to let these guys sit in the pan and then I will come back when I flip them over. All right, it's been probably 2 to 3 minutes and it's time to flip the eggplant. And again, this is gonna leave more residue on your pan than the squash. So you can see I've got a little bit of color, not a dark color. Honestly, probably could have even gone a couple more minutes, so I might flip those back over. But I'm not gonna re-oil the pan until right before the next batch of eggplant goes in. Again, these need to cook longer. I am going to, I think, flip these over a little bit. I will show you them right before I take them out of the pan so you can see what we're aiming for. Okie dokie. I did end up flipping these guys over again. They're nice and flexible. They have a good color. So they are now going to come out of the pan and go on my other trusty side plate. I don't put them on the same one as I do with the squash because we're going to be alternating layers. I'm going to put more oil in the pan. Again, just another couple of teaspoons. And we will do another layer of eggplant and try to squish it all in here, which is difficult because these are much larger than the squash slices. So that's probably about all I'll be able to get in here at a time. I will be right back because I want to show you one more time what the color should be on these. All right, time to flip. Again, we're not looking for a dark color, but you do want to see some nice brownness like you can see on that piece and this one too. Well, actually, they should all have it. So here we go. Perfect. All right, these ones I don't think I'm going to flip again. I think they'll be okay since I let them go just a little bit longer. But again, we're talking like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. But I'm going to do another 2 minutes on the second side. Again, these really need to be pretty cooked, but not falling apart. So I'm going to finish cooking all my eggplant. And then guess what? It's time to assemble and put this beautiful vegetarian lasagna in the oven. I will see you in a minute. All right, we worked so hard to get to this point, and now it is assembly time. So I have my kind of beat up 9x13 pan, and I spread a little olive oil on the bottom of it, just brushed some on and on the sides, you know, to help with stickage. And now I'm just going to spoon some of our beautiful tomato sauce on the bottom. You don't need a super thick layer, but you want to make sure that you have some coverage going on. My oven right now, by the way, is preheating to 400 degrees. Because that is also important. We're actually only going to put layers of the sauce on the bottom and then on the top because it's going to manage to seep in. So that looks pretty good to me. So I am aiming for 2 layers of eggplant and 1 layer of zucchini. So we're going to start with our eggplant. We're going to kind of shingle it in here. We have more eggplant than we have zucchini, so we can overlap a little bit on this layer. And then I should also mention that I have some shredded fresh mozzarella, and I also have some fresh ricotta that is homemade, which if you want the recipe for that, it is on thegamblingchef.com. It's really, really delicious. But you can absolutely just buy ricotta and use that kind of ricotta too. And again, I'm trying to use about half of it. So have any gaps like this one, I might just throw an extra piece. This does not have to be perfect, but as I've mentioned on my videos before, if you've watched them, I am a perfectionist, so I have a lot of trouble not making something perfect. So that is our first layer of eggplant. I tasted the vegetables, by the way, for seasoning. I added a little more salt to my tomato sauce, but you do not need to salt these layers. There's already salt on everything. So the next thing I'm gonna do is take some of my beautiful fresh ricotta that I made. I would say all in all, I probably have about a cup and a half. So I'm going to spread some of that on. This is very cheesy, by the way. I love cheese. Like, I have a problem. So you do not need to use as much cheese as I'm going to, or if you're like me and you can't get enough cheese, then go for it. And now I'm going to put some fresh mozzarella on here that I have shredded. And fresh mozzarella is different. You could actually use just regular mozzarella too, but fresh mozzarella is really nice when it melts, and it tends to be a little bit less salty than the other kind of mozzarella. I just really like it for this particular dish. So I have 16 ounces. I'm not sure, again, if I'm going to use all of that. Kind of depends on how cheesy I'm feeling. No. It just depends. It depends on how it looks and what I'm in the mood for on a particular day. All right, that looks great. And now we're going to do our layer of squash, and we're only doing one layer of squash, so you can get as close to the edges and gaps and overlapping with these as you want. And I'm gonna, since we've got the yellow and this zucchini, and we also have this Mexican squash as well, I'm gonna just use alternating spots of that and get everything in the pan. Okay, that is not bad. I have a little bit of leftover. No, I have only like 3 pieces of leftover squash, so it's not honestly that much. And I'm just giving it a little squish down to get everything pressed into place. All right, and now it is time for another layer of our cheese. So this will be our last layer of the fresh ricotta. Okay, and now for more of our fresh mozzarella. This lasagna, by the way, freezes really well. I usually make it, I make this all the time, by the way. Like, this isn't something I came up with just for my channel. I started making this before I had my channel, and I make it probably every other week, and I will just freeze a whole bunch and reheat it when I want to eat it, and it reheats in the microwave quite nicely. So I like cooking stuff that I can save for later. I'm not cooking for a big family, so being able to pre-prepare meals that I can then eat at a different time is pretty important to me. So I really, really like to be able to do that. Okay, I did end up using almost all of my fresh mozzarella for that layer, so I don't know, judge me if you want to. And now for our final layer of vegetables, which will be our eggplant. I'm gonna go this way with the eggplant now because we had other layers actually meant to alternate the direction of the layer of zucchini, and I was too deep into it to do that, so no worries, it'll still be fine. Okay, I've got my eggplant in here. I have like 3 pieces of leftover eggplant and 3 pieces of leftover zucchini, and honestly, I could have crammed those in there if I wanted to, but I didn't, so it's totally fine. And now all the rest of this tomato sauce is just gonna get dumped on the top, and we are gonna spread it out. And the reason you really don't need to put this between the layers is definitely gonna boil and soak in there. So I probably used like 1/3 of it on the bottom and 2/3 on the top. I kind of feel like it's nice to have more on the top so that when it's baking, the sauce kind of seeps down and bastes everything. And again, this is gonna have some water that lurches out of it, but the longer it sits, the better that will be. And again, we did lots of preparation with our vegetables to make sure that we do not have a watery mess, and hopefully the cheese will also help us out binding that a little bit too. So our final layer is Parmigiano Reggiano, and this is different than Parmesan because Parmesan is just a generic cheese that is trying to imitate Parmigiano Reggiano, and Parmigiano has to be from the actual region of Italy and certified that it's official Parmigiano Reggiano. Unlike if you find a cheese that's labeled Parmesan, it is not. And there is a difference, a huge difference, I would say, in flavor between American style Parmesan that you buy in a can or something and fresh Parmigiano. I took the time to grate this, and I always like a thick layer of Parmesan on the top of my vegetable lasagna. This gets all brown and bubbly. It tastes different and has a different texture than the other cheeses that we used. So now this is going to go into my preheated 400-degree oven, and it is going to bake. I'm going to set my timer for 45 minutes. I'm going to check it after that time, see how the top looks. I am not going to cover this with foil. I feel like it's better for this not to steam because, again, we're dealing with a lot of liquid. And we do want the cheese to get brown as well. So if I check it after 45 minutes or if I check it before then and I smell something, you can always put a piece of foil gently over the top and it'll prevent it from burning. So, don't worry about not covering it though. I've baked this many times. So I will see you guys in a little bit when I take this out of the oven. I cannot wait to show you. Okay, our lasagna just came out of the oven. It is a thing of beauty. It's still bubbling a little bit. It was bubbling vigorously when I first took it out of the oven. But you do need to let this beautifulness cool for at least 25 minutes or so before you cut into it. Otherwise, this is just going to be like a watery mess. So exercise some self-control. And we are going to let this finish cooling down, and then I'm going to cut into it, and then we're going to taste. And I can't wait because it is just gorgeous. Okay, it's time to taste the vegetable lasagna. I eat this all the time because it's truly one of my favorite dishes, and you can see it right here. It's so tender that I'm going to cut it with my fork because it has all the vegetables prepared properly. It's the tomato sauce, which is simple, but really showcases the freshness of the vegetables and the other ingredients, and of course the cheese. I can never have too much cheese in my life. You can get this recipe and all my recipes on thegamblingchef.com. And please be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and videos, and on Facebook you can follow me and also like my videos. And I will see you next time.